character. My gosh.
All
Okay.
right. Well, welcome everyone to our Arcadia Book Club May discussion of James by Percival Everett. So I have not read Huckleberry Finn. I've read lots of other Mark Twain's, but not that one.
Wait, hold it. How did you get out of high school not reading Huckleberry Finn? What did you do? Go to one of those progressive schools or something? I mean,
No, I haven't read it either. So
yeah, well, I mean, Karen,
Okay.
Karen didn't even go to high school. I mean, people don't know this, but
all right, there is that, but come on.
grew up in a sod house in western Nebraska and only escaped.
Okay, maybe what we should ask is who has read Huckleberry Finn?
I did. And I did something really more interesting. So I read it. I think I read Tom Sawyer. So when I read James, I read it side by side with Huckleberry Finn.
Good idea.
Ah, very good.
Robert Petrick, who's supposed to be on this meeting, did the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, that would have been, I wish I'd had the time to do that because I haven't read it in probably 25 years, but I mean, since high school, of course.
Denise,
Yes.
what did you notice reading them side by side like that? That's fascinating.
I actually enjoyed it because there's a point where in James, it doesn't parallel too much what Twain was doing,
Right.
but he towards the end. But I enjoyed it because part of it is you forget more about the character, who Huckleberry Finn was, and then it's interesting to see how Jim is, not James, in Huckleberry Finn, and then just the language. So it actually it didn't take long to do because James reads a lot faster than reading Twain.
Yeah, I agree. It reads very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. Huh. Wow. Well, I love that, because I kept thinking as I was reading along in James, how's he gonna navigate the whole thing when Tom comes back and all that stuff? And he just stepped aside from it and just did his, the last third of his book is his book, not Mark Twain. And I thought that was just a brilliant, brilliant idea. God, so good.
I taught the book to high school kids for many years.
Oh, wow.
And in somewhat recent times. I retired from teaching in 2007, but it was a real struggle dealing with the last third of Huck Finn because then that's where most of the criticism is
Right.
is directed towards the last third, which is very difficult to get through. Because Tom enters after the Duke and the King, and as with most things with Tom Sawyer, he pretty much ruins things. And I think I don't know what Twain was up to other than making money by doing that, because Tom Sawyer had been successful. But it was really refreshing to see a different ending, because it was very difficult to deal with the ending.
Yeah.
When Jim is locked up at the Phelps farm, it's pretty awful stuff.
Yeah. God.
Yeah. I just want to add, I first read Huckleberry Finn maybe a year or two ago, realizing I had never read it. I got it, read it. And because I kind of, all right, what's this all about? I read some, I don't know, review or whatever I read. And this, yes, the Tom Sawyer final third with him, people, I don't know, whatever reviewer it was, said you should have just dropped that because it really didn't, it just muddied the waters, for lack of a better term. Yeah, it just, and when I read it, I'm like, yeah, it just kind of falls apart there. So I'm glad that the James book ended where it did. So.
Well, and I just think that, well, let me just say two things, and then I'm going to just let everybody else talk. But the book starts with these weird these songs from this notebook of some guy, you have no idea who he is, and they're written out, and you're thinking, what is this? And why is it here? Why does it start the book? And then you get into that whole section of the guys in blackface and Jim and the other guy, two black people in blackface, and singing those songs, and that this guy actually did write the song Dixie. It just, that scene alone would be worth the whole book. I mean, just the levels of things to sort of ponder and laugh out loud about and shake your head. And I mean, it's just insanely good. And then of course that leads to all the rest when he gets more and more, he allows his anger to rise. And man, but yeah, that sequence with the with with the guys, it would be like, the Yale Whiffenpoof people coming, and in blackface and singing. I mean, it was just so weird and so beautifully laid into the story. And the fact that he was purchased because he was a good tenor was just, oh my God. Sometimes you just think, when a really good writer gets a really good idea, I wonder what that feels like, where he just thinks, God, this is going to knock people's on their ass. I mean, it's just so amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
To follow what you said, James, about that, I read the book, The 1619 Project, and they had a chapter about what we have been led to believe, or that these are Negro spirituals. They're not. They were written by white people for blackface white people to sing. Right. And they became thought or known as Negro spirituals, and they're not really. And that chapter in the 1619 Project laid that all out, and it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think many of us grew up with a lot of disturbing myths being presented as truth. That's for sure.
Well, maybe just those opening songs, I guess, when James is educating his children, and I guess they call it the incorrect grammar, and he corrects them, that, you want to have, I got to correct your grammar around white people. And I don't know if that's something, this is the first book I ever read by Percival Everett, and I saw the film American Fiction. So it kind of, his writing is got a lot of what I call dark humor in it. So, and that whole scene when he's, and I guess it goes back to who are the spiritual, lyrics. I didn't know that, that they were written by a white person for Black people to sing. So it almost ties into that incorrect grammar that Percival wrote about.
He's done a lot of interesting interviews over the last 6 weeks, and you can track most of them down. But one of the things that he did say about that, and I can't remember which one it was in, might have been when he was interviewed at Politics and Prose, but he basically said the point being, and this is true, of course, of all the Eastern European countries under the communist reign from the 40s to the 90s, people had to develop a language that they could speak that made it safe to speak to each other, because they were, they couldn't reveal what they were really thinking. And he said that's all what he was trying to do, was to suggest that the slaves developed a way to speak to each other safely in a language that the white people weren't aware of. And I love that isn't there a line somewhere early in play or in the play, God, in the book where one of Jim's friends says to him, "I don't even think they think we can speak."
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's that sense of, it's the danger of creating a kind of controlling myth about a group of people, then it becomes your truth and okay.
I thought that what he did with the,
Oh,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Allison.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I thought that what he did with the language was so interesting because it becomes almost like a code or something. I didn't know what to make of those songs at first, until I got to that part in the book where they come up. But then retrospectively, they sort of seem like a weird, creepy overture of some kind, sort of setting the scene in a way. But I just thought what he did with the kind of code switching language was really, really brilliant. I mean, it was just
Yeah,
mind-bogglingly brilliant, I thought,
yeah, I agree.
And that part where he's early in the book where he's teaching the kids, you brought that up, but here's how you speak among ourselves, but now translate that please for white people talk, and I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Has any other writer done that?
What?
Has any other writer done that in terms of presenting when the slaves spoke to one another that they used standard English, whereas obviously when they're speaking
Seems like maybe Toni Morrison might have, I'm thinking,
Oh,
as in books, maybe,
Hmm.
possibly. Beloved. It's been a while since I read it, though.
I'm trying to remember.
I have a question about the language code switching thing. Is this something he created for the book, for writing this book and presenting this, well, code switching? Or did slaves really have a code switch like in the 1700s and 1800s? Or is this just a construct for the book to bring out a point that he, wanted to make on this? I'm just curious what people think.
Comments, anybody?
Hmm.
I mean,
I'm gonna guess they had a code, but the code was perhaps just a different dialect than the dialect they used with the white people. But I think it's mostly a beautiful construct for the book because, for one thing, it really enhances the incredible intelligence not only of James but of the other slaves, and it's also I mean, it's this incredible construct that separates him from Huck, who turns out in this version to be his son, and so when he breaks the code on several occasions, Huck is gaining insight into what's going on here, and he questions James, why are you talking like that? And then James realizes he's got to go back into character. But whether they had, I mean, you had to be pretty educated in a traditional sense to pull this off, because the most educated people, say in Hannibal, didn't talk this well as James does. And so I think it's just and obviously James reading all the classical books that he does from Judge Thatcher's library is just part of who he is. And the language in part surely developed out of all that education he did to himself, for himself.
Yeah. Well, and the payoffs at the end when he interacts with the two slave owners, who he ends up, humiliating via talk. It's just, it's a very, very rich payoff. But I agree with you that it probably was a different I think his point really was, Barbara, that yes, they had a way of communicating with each other that was private. But I think the being able to do it in the way that he chose to do it in the book just gives you so much kind of inverted pleasure when this slave owners are so startled that he can speak in the way that he can, and he knows so many things. So, and that, it ties in too, I think, with someone like Shaw, who tried to write so frequently about helping people helping people get an opportunity, because he knew, just as everybody knows, if you think about it even for a minute, that there are hugely intelligent people at every level of society, and it's just getting those people the opportunities that society would rather they not have. It's a lot of what's going on there. Hmm.
So I watched quite a few interviews with Percival Everett, just to, just because it's interesting to hear his behind the scenes thoughts. And I guess they shouldn't surprise us, but he's a huge fan, and actually, as a professor, teaches Blazing Saddles. So
Yeah,
that's the brilliance right there in Blazing Saddles. His interview with Ann Patchett at Parnassus is also excellent, and she wasn't even supposed to be the person to interview him, so they just had a really lovely conversation, and you can listen to that on YouTube or wherever else it is. Oh, I'm going to let somebody else in the room here.
yeah. I think he did. He in the PBS interview. I just looked at a note that I had here, and he said the four people who taught him about humor were his father, Mark Twain, Groucho Marx, and Bullwinkle.
That's right.
And as someone who I adored Rocky and Bullwinkle, I think that's how I learned all sorts of things about language, was listening to that ridiculous cartoon, because they were so brilliant. Yeah, he's an unusual guy, a really unusual guy. Hmm.
So folks, I have a question. Am I the only one here who knows many of those songs? I mean, I grew up in the 60s. First 8 years I lived in Texas. I don't know if it was a Texan. And why do I know those songs? I'm just ashamed that, in what context did I ever learn them? Does anyone else know those songs?
I knew a couple of them when I was a kid. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, why do we know those?
I think I learned
I
them off.
sang some of them in grade school.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the teachers would like
Oh, the Blue Tail
the
Fly.
Blue Tail Fly we
Right.
sang in grade school.
Right.
Yeah,
Why
I knew some of them too, and I don't know. I mean, they were just in the, unfortunate lexicon of our heritage. I mean, what we heard growing up, I think.
Yeah, like Turkey in the Straw.
Turkey in the
that's-
Straw,
And,
yeah, Turkey in the
yes.
Straw. I mean, we did square
Yeah.
dancing to that in
Yeah.
3rd grade,
Yeah. And Dixie, I forget the
Dixie.
title. The-
Land of Cotton song?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, so what were our teachers in grade school or wherever? I mean, in what context were they saying, hey, students, we're going to learn these songs? I'm just appalled, I guess.
I think
But they were generalized songbooks.
yeah,
I-
that's
Yeah,
right.
I went-
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were
schooling
considered
Yeah,
folk-
and they were just
folk
in, we
songs,
had a
work
songbook,
songs.
yeah,
Yeah, things like
including Swanee, which isn't in this book, but
that. Right.
Yeah, just like this chapter in the 1619 project pointed out, it was just part of our culture, and we all thought they were some Negro spirituals, or just, then the slaves were all happy and they were singing these songs as they worked in the field. It was BS, but it's just like James said, this myth that has become truth.
Mhm.
one of the things that Everett said, I heard in a number of interviews that when he was asked, was he trying to just, how was he writing this book in the context of Huck Finn? He said, well, for him, it was just having a conversation with Mark Twain.
Right.
And I think that was a very helpful insight into kind of getting a handle on what was going on in the book, because there are many aspects of Huck Finn, you know, before the last third of the book, where you say, wow, that's really beautiful. But from Huck's point of view, but nonetheless, Huck's unlearning racism and learning something about the humanity of Jim. There's some very, very beautiful scenes, and I think Everett really just jumped off from the beauty of what Huck Finn is and disregarded the questionable stuff.
Right. I think I agree. I think that's right.
Since I didn't read Huck Finn, is that as funny as this book is? I mean, there are
yes,
such a surprise and laugh out loud at.
I think Huck Finn, it's a rollicking adventure. I mean, it's some of it's so, I mean, there's the Duke, and don't forget there's the Dauphin. Forget about the king, you know, he's you know, has to, like, I mean, there's so ridiculous characters. So yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels. And that's why I enjoyed going back to read Huck Finn, to see, you know, what does Percival Everett do with James versus Jim? And it follows where the story where they both escape. They meet up on that, I can't think, the island that's in the middle of the Mississippi, or what, right, nearby. And it does, and I think where it finally departs is when that final episode with the Duke and the Dauphin ends and everything. And then James just, Percival Everett changes the book. So it doesn't, there is a linear correlation, but then it just departs after the Duke, they finally depart. So.
Well, you know, I think the Duke and the King are obviously supposed to be comic relief in Huck Finn, but there was a nastiness about them from the get-go, and Everett really accentuates their nastiness, because from the beginning, their goal is to make some money off of Jim. And then because in the book they sell them, I think, for $300 to the Phelps farm before they get tarred and feathered. But there are a bunch of things in Huck Finn where you say, well, okay, it depends from what perspective you are coming at that book. You can you think it's funny, but it's tragically awful. Much of the humor, and I think Twain was in part fully aware of it, and I think Twain was also a very commercial writer, and he knew how to sell books, and so the humor in part was just his way to bring in an audience and buy his book.
So I don't know much about, you know, Mark Twain and where, you know, so did he have empathy for slave? I mean, where did he stand? Because Mark Twain was written in when was it? It was published. Wait, when it was.
He started writing it in
1876
and finished it in 1884.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, you know, I was trying to find out before this to get more research about, you know, where Twain kind of stood. Here he's writing this book, and this is before Jim Crow and all that. So I don't know. Do you have any insights of where was Twain northerner, you know, like a northern at heart, but living in the South?
Well, he ended up living in Connecticut. I mean, but he was from Missouri, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary about Twain years ago, and he wrote Huck Finn to comment on slavery. I don't know if he was a total pro-slavery guy, even when he grew up in Missouri and all, but his views, he thought about it a lot over the decades, and Huck Finn was the result. And the documentary just said the book was astounding when it came out
Mhm.
to the general public at the time, the 1880s America.
Okay.
Okay, so Samuel Clemens' family owned slaves. He himself came to an anti-slavery view and supported Abraham Lincoln and the abolitionist movement. He promoted civil rights and supported several associates who were Black in their education.
Yeah. And you remember, there's that really, for me, the most poignant scene in Huck Finn is when Huck has an opportunity to betray Jim,
Mhm.
and his conscience
Yeah.
tells
Yeah.
him not to. And that to me is very poignant. And I thought a very human, I thought that was Twain's insight, I guess, into the whole conundrum of slaves and free men and a child, having this adult being, quote, beneath him. But he recognized his humanity and stood by him at a critical time. The last third of the book is just god awful, I think, because he returns to being a slave, basically. But that moment, I thought, for me, was crystal clear about Twain's intention for me. Yeah.
I think Huck tells himself that as he's struggling with turning Jim in or not.
Right.
And I think his thought to himself was, all right, I'll go to hell and not turn him in.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I mean, that was a big deal.
It was a huge deal.
Constantly reminded in his home. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There are actually these two moments in Huck Finn, and the one you were just referring to, I think it's chapter 16, where he has the chance to turn him in.
Yeah.
And in a sense, he passively says, I'm just not going to do it.
Right.
But in the most famous chapter from Huck Finn, chapter 31, where Jim has been sold and he goes through this angst about, I'm a bad kid. I'm going to do the bad things. That's all I know. And I'm going to devote myself to freeing Jim. That's a much more active position that he's taking. So he goes to the Phelps farm with the intention of doing all he can to free Jim. And then Tom comes in and hijacks the whole thing.
Right. That's a good
But
point.
the growth from, say, chapter 16 to chapter 31 is immense for Huck, and it's after chapter 31 where the book kind of falls apart. But yeah, I mean, I probably much like Twain, I think Huck Finn had to unlearn a tremendous amount of stuff in order to reach those positions.
That's true.
Yeah, the thing that I found interesting was that Twain was using Huck as somebody who could see the humanity of Jim, but Huck himself was an outlier.
Yes.
He was, and so that was convenient or constructed by Twain to help him be the person who's accepting Jim.
Right. And hearing it from a child may be easier for the audience than an adult. Oh, he's just a kid, but it's very poignant because, as you say, you see this growth of his character. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that though, then by doing that, he does sort of let the adults reading the book off the hook.
In a way, I guess.
In a way.
A little child shall lead them.
But I was going to say, no, I don't know if he lets them off the hook as a kid coming to that realization. He's not a little kid. Huck's a teenager, isn't he?
Yeah.
Early teens or something. So he's not like an 8-year-old.
No, and he's had to deal with a lot more things than most kids. I mean,
Yeah.
he has to be self-sufficient and an adult, especially with his alcoholic father and loss of mother, and yeah, raise himself in a way.
If I could add, like Michael, I'm former high school English teacher, so I think I read this Huck Finn anyway about once a year for 20 years, and had some fascinating conversations with my students. And I would like to give a shout out to two students from the mid-1990s, Jason and Brian. I remember them kind of intrigued by the book and telling me, Mr. Hazley, this book would be a whole lot better if it weren't the adventures of Huck Finn, if it were the adventures of Jim.
Wow.
You know,
Interesting.
What
at
insight.
age 15, 16,
Yeah,
and we're on to something.
yeah.
And the other thing that struck me about teenagers reading Huckleberry Finn, how many of them picked up on a subtlety of the book, and we could never figure out how much Mark Twain invented. But Huck and Jim are on this great adventure because Jim's going to be sold down the river and is trying to escape from Miss Watson, and Huck is trying to escape from his father.
Yeah. Oh,
But Jim knows that Huck's father is dead and has seen his corpse
oh, okay.
and doesn't tell Huck until the end. And we
Yeah.
talk back and forth, and students are picking up on Jim's a whole lot savvier than we are led to believe.
Yeah.
Has he just, as Huck is playing with Jim, has Jim just been leading him on the entire book by withholding that information from him so that Huck will assist him? So those are just some of my memories from teaching the book with teenagers for so many years.
Well, gosh.
Oh,
Sorry,
I
John,
haven't-
John or Mike, Michael, how did you go about with teaching with the language?
Oh, you asking me?
The dialect.
Either one of you English teachers, yeah.
Well, I mean, one challenge was certainly the N word, and it's used like 220 times or something in Huck Finn. And either you had to just say, okay, you had to explain why it's used and even say the word, but that runs all sorts of risks, obviously. I mean, it would be ridiculous if you're reading portions of it aloud and you just came across something, you just said N word, even though, I mean, I was dealing with mostly a white audience of students. And so that is an issue in and of itself. And unfortunately, that becomes the number one reason why the book is challenged and is taught less and less every year, just because of that issue alone. But my whole purpose of teaching the book was students had to create an argument: is the book racist or not? Did Twain unknowingly, unwittingly, or intentionally create a book that is in fact racist because of the demeaning portrayal of Jim? Or is it in fact a great insight into Jim's profound wisdom and decency, etc.? And so they had to, it was an argument-based investigation using the scenes from the book to justify a position. But unfortunately, there are too many sections of the book where Jim is absent, like the last third of the book. And so it becomes more and more difficult to do that. But nonetheless, that was the challenge I presented to students. But I mean, there's the one scene which I'm really grateful that Everett omitted. It's one of the great moments of Huck learning, and when Jim is feeling totally forlorn and he's thinking about his child and wife back in Hannibal, and he's lamenting the time when he actually smacked his kid because he didn't know that his child had a hearing loss, and so he kind of reaches out and hits his kid, and that would have just been totally demeaning to whatever it was up to in this book. And so I'm glad that he actually avoided that trap. But in terms of the language itself, you just had to go through it. There was no question, well, did Jim actually talk differently when he was around his fellow slaves? We didn't wade into that, and that's one reason why I love James so much, is because in many ways this would be a much more interesting book to teach than Huck Finn, although you probably need the backdrop of Huck Finn in order for it to make sense.
Yeah.
So anyway,
You could do a whole semester on the two books, though.
yeah, I'm sure it will be done.
Yeah.
Good. Very interesting.
So I'm just curious, because everybody who's teaching Huck Finn is, Everett opens his book with those spiritual songs. And the one funny thing of Twain's, he opens up with this notice. I think it's something about, if you don't attempt to find motive because you'll be prosecuted. And he goes on to saying, this is a not serious book. It's just an adventure. So it's almost like I always thought he dismisses slavery by giving this notice. Like the two people that go on adventure and don't find it, because he does say don't attempt to find anything moral.
I think that was in the context of his culture. That
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
way to make his message go more smoothly. I mean, I think he certainly talks about racism in the book,
Yeah.
but it was quite bold of him to do what he did.
Mhm.
So that's my opinion, that was just a cover up.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way
I thought that notice was kind of just like a straw man that he set up at the beginning, to sort of,
distract. Yeah.
yeah.
It's called deniability, isn't it? I mean, you want to make sure you can say, well, no, this was just, I said it right in the introduction. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
real. It's just
Protect yourself.
making it up. Who cares?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have any background into reading Huck Finn, and I realized that my knowledge of some of those songs comes from the black and white minstrel show shown in England, yonks ago. It seems all rather horrific now, but I do remember seeing people in all that blackface. But I think the one of the things that struck me most in James was the beautiful language and images of James and his love of the written word.
Yes.
The pencil story tore at my heart, and
Yes. Yeah. Powerful.
just when he's describing his need to write and his love of all these books. And recently we had seen Candide at the Overture Center, so that was a nice connection. James Ridge playing Voltaire. So those were the pages I marked the most. And I thought the story that tugged at my heartstrings too was Nate coming up with a name. What was it? Calling somebody February because they were born in June, but that's the stupidity of their race. I mean, it was just horribly ugly, wasn't it? So what did you think? Were you moved by those passages about writing, reading, the pencil?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That somebody could die over a pencil that was never even found. I mean,
exactly.
my gosh,
Horrific. Horrific.
it was horrible.
No, it was.
I have something else that I guess, wondered about is when the overseer was drunk on the island and James kills him and doesn't really doesn't have remorse. He's just like, I killed him and didn't look back. Okay. So then further on, Judge Thatcher, he takes him over to the island and he just ties him up and even says he tied him loosely, that he could have probably gotten free, or and I'm like, so why didn't he kill Judge Thatcher? I mean, he killed the other guy and now leaving Judge Thatcher alive, could put him obviously much more at risk. And so I didn't understand, why didn't you just do him in too? You did in the other
I
guy.
thought he strangled him. Did I miss that?
He strangled the first guy.
I thought he strangled both of them or
No.
killed both of them. No, did I miss
Unless
that?
I don't know what other people.
Yeah. I gotta go back and look at that. Yeah.
Barbara, what struck me is when he kills the overseer, and it's just, the physicalness of it, because he has the overseer's head or neck in his crook of his elbow, and he's face to face with him. And I think it's just the sheer connection that he's a father and his daughter, what's been happening to his daughter, what's happened to his wife, throughout his marriage, while he's been gone, whenever, but I think it was just such a strong connection.
Yeah,
He had to seek
Well-
revenge for what he was imagining.
yeah. I guess
Yeah.
I conflated the two, sorry.
And he had that brief time with the young woman who had been raped repeatedly
Oh, God,
and shot on the right, when they were escaping.
horrible.
I think, that just for him to have that experience and, so easily step over to his daughter
Yes.
and wife. I don't know. I always let me just say one idea I have about why he left the judge alive is because the judge was an educated man, and I think it was much harder. It's going to be much harder for the judge to kind of live his life in the glib way that he's lived it. He probably will go right back. But I think if I was James, I would want to I would like to whisper in his ear, you're going to have to remember the way I spoke to you, you stupid fuck, for the rest of your life. I'm not going to kill you. And that's the gift I'm giving to you if you want to figure this out. And if you don't, then I hope you die tomorrow. But it's just, it was so, I just thought that, the overseer who'd done so much and he represented so many people doing so much, if he didn't kill the overseer, I would have thrown the book across the room. I mean, some of these people just need to be eliminated. And I haven't hit anybody since 6th grade, and I take every fly out of my house without killing them. I mean, I'm absolutely against killing, but it's really hard with some of these guys.
What I thought was sleazy about the judge was that he did something horrendous. He sold Sadie and Lizzie to a breeding farm.
Yes. Yes.
Hands free. He didn't have to touch anything. He didn't have to see it. But what a cruel act.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Terrible.
And I think at that point, James knew that they had been sold, and he
Right.
just wants to find out where. And so that increases his rage toward the overseer for sure, and Judge Thatcher, obviously. But
Yeah. Now, I came in late. I apologize. I was at another meeting. So you have maybe have already talked about this, but did I misread as well that the suggestion is that James is Huck's father?
Yes.
Okay, so that I did get that. I thought, whoa, that sure changes the tenor of this. I mean, he really is them looking at, he can't look after his wife and daughter immediately, but he can look after his son. That's how I felt about their relationship, which was quite poignant.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was a brilliant stroke.
God, it just hit me by the side of the head.
It's kind of reversing the Tom Jefferson thing, that sort of.
That's interesting, right? Yeah. We don't know much about the mother, but she must have been obviously maybe helped him to read. I don't know.
I reread some of the earlier stuff, and at one point in the earlier chapter, Huck says, "Was my mother beautiful or nice looking or something?" And Jim says, I can't talk about that."
Yeah.
And and Huck doesn't get it, but he's basically saying, "I'm a black man. I can't talk about how beautiful a white woman might be."
Or maybe she was passing.
Yeah, I think she was passing. But and then Huck says, "Was she at least a nice person?" He said, "Yeah, she was a very nice person. We knew each other." So it sounds, I'm sure she was passing, and just as Huck is passing, and James knows all of that, and but he couldn't stay with her as his wife because she was passing. But it's a wonderful spin on the story, I think, because in the Huck Finn book, there are so many times when Jim is the father figure for Huck on that voyage.
Yes.
And so it just takes that concept and finalizes it by saying, yeah, he's not metaphorically his father. He's literally his father.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So good.
I'm forgetting, and it's probably just my oversight. Do we know who the mother's parents are in the novel? I can't remember.
I don't
Do
think
they-
so.
does
We don't know
this-
much at all about the mother you mean in James or Huck Finn?
in James?
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
either one.
know.
I don't know. Don't know.
Wait, so who was raising Huck?
The dad. I mean, the mother died when he was young, right? No?
Right, but the dad's not really raising them, right?
He
No,
raised
was
himself,
Mrs.
I think, you know?
Wasn't it Mrs.
Oh, no.
Watson?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mrs. Watson. Yeah.
So
Oh,
how
okay.
did,
Like a court-appointed guardian. That's what
Yeah.
Miss
Oh.
Watson and the widow
Okay.
Douglas are.
Okay.
And
But there's several moments where when I think it's Huck who says, "I don't know why my father hates you so much, more than he hates other black men."
Yes.
Oh.
Oh,
So it's
that's
just all these little hints that I missed much of when I was reading it the first time.
a good point.
But it's a really neat concept.
Right, and the father also talks about Huck's hair,
About Huck's.
that he doesn't like Huck's hair.
oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So Michael, did you read it twice? James?
No, I just read bits of it. I had read it the first time, like more than a month ago. So I just read
Oh.
a few little things, just as a way to kind of see how he sets the thing up. But it was pretty neat. I mean, there are all these moments. The first moment I picked up that there was going to be something with Huck and Jim was when Easter says, "Does the kid know?"
Hmm.
And you don't know whether does the kid know that you are the father, or does the kid know that he's passing?
Oh,
Because Easter can figure it out by just looking at him. And so that was the first major hint to me of the big reveal that comes later. But then when I look back at all these little things that,
huh.
Everett was very clear that he was setting this thing up,
Oh.
and it was. I had to read the section like about 5 times because I said, no, he's not really doing this, is he? Making Jim the father. It's just like he's just going to be his guardian father, so he feels okay, blah blah blah. But no, I think he's meant to be
Michael, I'm
literally.
thinking about something though. Maybe this is the stereotype I have of Huck. Why do I imagine that he was redheaded with freckles?
That's Tom.
That's Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Tom Sawyer.
It's Tom.
Oh, so what does Huck look like? I've never heard him described, I guess. I
Looks
just
like Jim.
maybe there's a reason, huh? We don't know.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
even in the
that's
very
a-
first few pages, Doris, one of the other slaves at the beginning, when they go, they're talking about which kind of irony is this, and which was hilarious.
Yeah.
Says something, was wondering what those 2 boys are up to, and right at the beginning, James defends Huck. He doesn't like Tom, but he says something right away to defend Huck.
Right.
So from the very beginning, we know that he is has somewhat of a soft spot for Huck.
Yeah.
In this book that we have that Michael used when he was teaching, it has illustrations from the 1880 something edition.
Yeah.
And Huck Finn is shown in the very picture of him, and he is looks like an adolescent boy with dark, sort of wavy hair.
Oh,
But that's a hat.
oh,
No, that's his hair right here, honey. Right here's his hair. You can see his hair.
Okay,
coming
well,
up.
anyway,
That's the picture.
that might be just the assumption from 1884.
okay.
But I love that moment in the book because your hair sort of stands up on end when he says, "Does the kid know?" Just kid understand what's going on here. And you just think, "Oh my God!" Whoa.
Well, since we're talking about here, the scene where the white father of that girl who kind of liked
No, yeah,
Jim
Yeah.
comes to tent or wherever they're camping and touches his hair, you know, supposed to be in blackface and he's like, well, that wig is, and then I forget the leader of the, you know, singing group guy says, well, it's a wig and it's just, you know, really done well and but it's a wig. And the guy's like, well, I don't know. And then he, you know, sends him packing when he says, well, are you, you know, that kind of interested in other men, you know? And
Yeah.
I thought that was all quite interesting.
Somebody asked on in the chat whether or not this book has been. I don't think it has yet because I think it's too new to be for people to try to get it out of schools or libraries, but I'm sure it will
If
be.
this has been, James has been banned, really?
Oh, no, there was just a
Oh.
question whether it
Oh,
had.
okay.
I think
Yeah.
they would have to, because you know, most of the people who are interested in banning books don't read them anyway, so it would be hard for.
So true.
I don't know. I think he did a great service to, I mean, there's so much, this book should live right alongside Huck Finn and make people think for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
So
I think he did a service to American literature. I mean, they should be sold together as a package, you know, a set.
Yeah.
yeah, they really should.
I wanted to just let you know I wasn't able to contribute to this because I haven't been able to get my hands on James yet, but I'm in another book club and it's my turn soon to recommend a book. And I was thinking about this one. And since diversity and equity, and these are some teachers along with me, so I really appreciated being able to sit in, and I think it sounds like you would recommend this since you chose it for your book club. Of course, I figured that would be a good recommendation in itself, but I kind of wanted to get stimulated and be able to present it a little bit. So I appreciate hearing your comments, and not too much was given away, but enough to make it. I'm definitely going to read it myself if the others don't want to read this book. But and I have two dogs, golden doodles, and their names are Huck and Finn.
Oh, cute. Well, I love the idea of teaching them together, especially James, with your line about this is Everett having a conversation with Mark Twain.
Yes.
I love that idea of, you know, there's a connection between them, and it's a contemporary writer talking with a writer about this issue, and I love that idea.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know whether you read the acknowledgments at the end of the book, but the last two sentences of the acknowledgments are finally a nod to Mark Twain. His humor and humanity affected me long before I became a writer. Heaven for the climate, hell for my long-awaited lunch with Mark Twain.
Oh.
All right, well, I'm saying it. I think this is the Pulitzer. So we'll see. I mean, it's as high up there for me as Demon Copperhead and the Lincoln Highway. So
I read an earlier book. I think it's fairly recent in his long list of books, but it's called The Trees.
Yeah.
I read it after I read James, and that was like a finalist for the Booker, I think.
It was.
Or one of them anyway. Anyway, as much fun as Trees was, and then it just got to be kind of redundant in its horror. But for me, James to me was a better read than The Trees. So I think he's really elevated his game with this one.
Yeah.
Well, this Pulitzer, you know, I have not read it yet, but it was by a woman who writes about the post-Civil War era. So it's part of a trilogy, evidently. So maybe, you know, the Civil War era before and after. I don't know. Let's
Oh,
hope.
are you thinking of that novel by Jane Ann Phillips? Is that the
Yes.
one? Yeah.
I've not read it.
The Night Watch, I think it was
Yeah,
called, or
yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
But
Yeah.
both,
That's an amazing book. That's
is it?
amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just pose the question, when Huck Finn was set in the 1840s, and this is set in the 1860s, you can see there are soldiers marching around, etc. Anybody ponder that one? I mean, why he shifted gears? I mean, I have a number of ideas myself, but that was a very dramatic plot change from Huck Finn to go 20 years further into the future.
Well, don't they see Union soldiers at some point or something? I mean, it allowed him to introduce that element, I thought, and that conflict.
But Twain was writing this after emancipation.
Yeah, Twain wrote it, Reconstruction had ended when he wrote it, and Jim Crow was beginning, and so that's when Twain did his book over an 8-year span, but it was set in the 1840s.
Right.
It certainly allows Jim to escape to Iowa with the chance of successfully escaping.
Right.
Better than if it had been in 1840.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I knew this was going to be a great discussion because it's a fabulous book and a great group of people discussing. So we're going to, I don't know, we're going to do a 180 and then a 180 and then a 180 again to talk about this next book, because this is, as Monty Python would say, something completely different. This is called The Ministry of Time by, I think it's Kellyanne Bradley. That's how she pronounces her first name. So this is a little bit of something for everyone. It's set in the nearest future, and the UK scientists have discovered time travel, and so they send their time machine back to bring in a few different people from different eras. So I think start like in the 1400s, and then they have a bridge who is a, like a regular person that is their keeper. So they bring them into the present day, and so they're I'm not doing it justice to explain it, but it's really good. So trust me, it's just really good. So we're going to talk about this on June 19th at 6 p.m.
Okay.
So The Ministry of Time. And this has been getting rave reviews. Melanie, who is does the adult books buying with James, loved it, and she has fantastic taste. So let's see what you think.
I've read a lot of good reviews of it. It's it's supposed to be great. And it is a change of pace, that's for sure.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in June.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.